You already know who you'd call if something went terribly wrong tonight. And the list is short. Maybe one person. Maybe two. Maybe you ran through the names and realized, honestly, with no drama, that there isn't a single person on this earth you'd call without first calculating what it would cost you. Not because you're broken, not because nobody loves you, but because somewhere along the way, you learned something that most people spend their whole lives trying not to learn. People will surprise you, and rarely in the way you hoped. You've been let down quietly, not betrayed dramatically. No knives in backs, no public humiliations, just the slow accumulating evidence that the people who said they'd be there weren't. Not when it mattered. Not when the silence was heavy and the night was long and you actually needed someone to show up. Not with advice, not with a fix, just with presence, and they didn't. So you adjusted. Not consciously, not with a decision you made sitting down, just gradually. The way water finds its level, you stopped volunteering information, you stopped expecting follow-through. You started watching what people do instead of listening to what they say. And what you saw taught you more about human nature than any book ever could. Now you have a small circle. Some days it feels like a fortress. Some days it feels like a cage. But here's what nobody ever tells you about people like you. You're not damaged. You're not cold. You're not incapable of love or friendship or connection. You're running a more sophisticated social operating system than almost everyone around you. And today, we're going to talk about exactly how it works.
Most people go through life with a factory default setting when it comes to trust. They meet someone new, extend good faith automatically, and wait to be proven wrong. They share early, open fast, call someone a friend after 3 good conversations. They operate on the assumption that most people are fundamentally decent until there's overwhelming evidence otherwise. And for a long time, that works. Until it doesn't. You learned earlier than most, or harder than most, that trust is not a starting point. It's a conclusion, something you arrive at after observation, after time, after watching how someone behaves when it costs them something to be decent. Not how they treat you when everything is easy and the mood is good and there's nothing at stake, but how they treat you when they're tired, when you need something inconvenient, when supporting you doesn't make them look good to anyone. That's the data that matters. And most people never collect it before they've already handed someone the ability to hurt them. You do it in the opposite order. You watch first. You extend trust in small increments, like testing ice before putting your full weight on it. You wait for consistency over time rather than warmth in the moment. That's not a trauma response. That's a calibrated response. There's a difference, and the difference matters more than most people realize. Here's the psychology that nobody puts in plain language. Your brain has a threat detection system, the amygdala, that is specifically designed to learn from social pain. Physical pain teaches you to avoid fire. Social pain teaches you to avoid the conditions that produced it. When you've been let down enough times, even quietly, even without drama, your brain doesn't forget. It catalogs. It builds a predictive model of human behavior based on actual evidence rather than wishful thinking. Psychologists call this hypervigilance in social contexts, but that term makes it sound like a disorder, like something to fix. What it actually is, in its functional form, is pattern recognition. You got good at reading people because you had to. You notice inconsistencies between what someone says and how they behave. You pick up on the micro signals, the way someone's interest in you correlates suspiciously with what they need from you, the way certain people are only available when the dynamic benefits them, the way "I'm always here for you" sounds different at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when nothing is wrong versus 2 a.m. on a Wednesday when everything is. Your brain learned to read the fine print, and now it applies that skill automatically. Every new person gets evaluated, not just on how they present themselves, but on whether their behavior over time matches their words, whether they show up when it costs them something, whether their interest in you is consistent or conditional. Most people call this being guarded. You call it being honest about how people actually work. There's a particular kind of tired that comes from being around people who perform friendship but don't deliver it. You know the type. The person who asks how you're doing but is already composing their response before you finish. The one who shows up for the good moments, the celebrations, the milestones, the fun parts, but develops a mysterious unavailability the moment things get heavy. The one who knows your name but not your actual life. And the thing that makes this exhausting isn't the disappointment itself. It's the performance you have to maintain around it. Because society has a very specific script for friendship. You're supposed to have a lot of it. You're supposed to be open and available and trusting and warm. You're supposed to treat acquaintances like confidants and share freely and assume good intentions and give people the benefit of the doubt indefinitely. And if you don't, if you're selective, if you're reserved, if you take time to trust, people read that as a problem, something wounded, something to fix. So you've spent years navigating the gap between what friendship actually is in your experience, rare, earned, worth protecting, and what everyone else seems to think it should be, abundant, easy, and assumed. That gap is exhausting, not because you're wrong about friendship, because you're right about it. And being right about something most people prefer not to examine is a specific kind of loneliness. You probably know the exact moment. Maybe you can name it. Maybe it was one thing, one person, one night, one silence where there should have been a voice. Or maybe it was accumulated, a slow series of smaller moments that eventually crossed a threshold your brain had quietly been tracking. Either way, there was a before and after. Before, you extended trust more freely. You believed what people said. You let people close without making them prove it first. After, the calculation changed. And here's what's important to understand about that shift. It wasn't damage, it was learning. When a child touches a hot stove, we don't say the child is damaged because they now avoid hot stoves. We say the child learned something real about the world. The learning was appropriate to the experience. Your social nervous system did the same thing. It encountered conditions that were genuinely unsafe, emotionally unsafe in the specific way of being let down by people who were supposed to hold something carefully and didn't, and it updated its model. The update was, closeness without evidence is a liability. That update protects you. It also costs you something. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and anyone who tells you otherwise is simplifying a complicated reality into something more comfortable for them to hear. Here's the part that's hard to say out loud. Having a small circle isn't always peaceful. There are moments, specific, recurring moments, where the smallness of it presses against you, where you want to reach out, but you've already done the calculation and come up empty, where you're sitting with something heavy and you realize there's no one to call who would understand it without you having to explain too much backstory, without you having to manage their reaction while also managing your own. That's a specific kind of loneliness, not the loneliness of being alone. You've made peace with being alone. You're often better alone than in the company of people who make you feel more isolated than solitude does. The loneliness of being surrounded by people and still knowing that nobody in the room has the full picture of who you are, of performing a social version of yourself, friendly, present, functional, while the actual you sits somewhere quieter, untouched, waiting for a level of trust that almost never arrives. You've gotten very good at that performance, probably too good. People think you know you because you've given them a convincing version, but you know the difference between the version you show and the version you are. And the gap between those two things, that's where the loneliness lives. But here's what's also true. When you do trust someone, when someone has made it through the long, quiet, unannounced process of proving themselves, the depth of that connection is something most people never experience. Because you don't do surface-level closeness. When someone's in your circle, they're actually in it. You show up completely. You remember the things they told you 6 months ago. You notice when something is off before they've said a word. You hold what they give you carefully because you know what it costs to give it. The friendships you have, few as they are not the casual, performative, circumstantial connections most people call friendships. They're something rarer, built slowly, tested quietly, maintained with a consistency that most people don't bring to their closest relationships. You don't have many friends, but the ones you have really know, that when you show up for them, it means something, because you don't show up for everyone. That selectivity isn't a wall, it's a standard, and the people who've made it past that standard know exactly how much it means.
People who don't understand you read your smallness as coldness.
They think you're aloof, hard to reach, emotionally unavailable. They mistake your observation period for disinterest. They mistake your silence for judgment. They mistake your reluctance to open immediately for arrogance or damage, none of which is even close. What they don't see is the amount of attention you're actually paying. You're not disengaged when you're quiet. You're processing. You're watching how someone treats the waiter. You're noticing whether they follow through on small things. You're tracking whether their private behavior matches their public presentation. You're building a picture carefully before you decide what to do with it. That's not coldness. That's care applied differently than they expected. And the people who stick around long enough to understand that, who don't take your reserve personally, who give you the time you need to form a real opinion of them, those are almost always the right people. Because the ones who leave because you didn't open fast enough were probably looking for an audience, not a friend. So if this is you, if you recognized yourself in all of this, what does it actually mean for how you move through the world? First, stop apologizing for the size of your circle. Not to others, not to yourself. The question is never how many people you trust. The question is whether the people you trust are worth trusting. One person who actually shows up is worth 50 who perform closeness. Second, learn to distinguish between your protective instinct in the moments it overcorrects. The same system that protects you can sometimes close you off to people who were never going to hurt you, people who are genuinely safe, but who get evaluated by a standard built for people who weren't. Pay attention to that. Not to lower your standards, but to make sure you're applying them to current data rather than old evidence. Third, give yourself permission to want more connection while also honoring your need for depth over volume. Those two things aren't contradictory. You can want closeness and also refuse to accept a cheap version of it. Holding both of those things at once isn't confusion, it's honesty. And fourth, understand that the loneliness you feel sometimes isn't a sign that your system is broken. It's the cost of having standards. Every standard costs something. The cost of yours is occasional aloneness. The benefit is that the connections you do have are real. That's not a bad trade. You are not too guarded. You are not too damaged. You are not incapable of connection. You are someone who learned the hard way through actual experience that not everyone who calls themselves a friend is one. That presence without reliability is just company. That warmth without consistency is just performance. And you decided quietly, without making a declaration about it, that you'd rather have one real thing than 10 convincing imitations. That decision makes you harder to know. It also makes you worth knowing. And the people in your life who've made it through, who stayed long enough, shown up consistently enough, been honest enough in the dark moments to earn the version of you that most people never see, they know exactly how rare that is. If this video finally gave language to something you've been carrying for years, this channel exists exactly for that. New videos every few days, each one built around something you've always felt but never had words for. Subscribe, turn on the bell. The next one might find you at exactly the right moment.